So next up is our first external speaker of the day. If you live in Denmark, you will probably know him and know his name. Bjarne Corydon. Today he is the CEO and editor-in-chief of Dagbladet Børsen, as everybody knows Børsen, you know. He's also the former Minister of Finance in Denmark, and he has also been the global director of McKinsey. And last but not least, a real big supporter of Taylor Swift, apparently. We could read that in the press today. So welcome to the stage, Bjarne.
Thanks a bunch for that. And I didn't get to be the global manager of McKinsey. It was McKinsey Center of Government, but it almost felt like that. So thank you so much for this opportunity to share some thoughts and hopefully also have a conversation about some of the real big topics on the agenda right now. I'll talk about the future business landscape and the impact of AI. And I think those are topics that are really on the minds of a lot of business leaders and professionals. A sense that something pretty fundamental is changing right now, but also maybe a lack of a framework to have educated conversations about what's going on. I have the same feeling, but I'm fortunate enough to be paid and have a job that allows me to spend time trying to explore these issues, talking to lots of sources, lots of decision makers that are deeply involved into these topics in the private sector, in politics, in Denmark, outside of Denmark, globally, also experts and thinkers. So it's a privileged job in a very exciting time. And I think an opportunity like this, I really appreciate the ability to try and share a bit of the thoughts I've had coming out of those many conversations and inputs, and hopefully get a bit of pushback from you on what I'm going to present. So to enable that, I'll not use slides. I'll just speak. Once a politician, always a politician. So speaking comes easy for politicians, and I'll try to make the points that I'll put forward. Not provocative, but maybe slightly simplistic. And with a bit of hard claims in there, for you to be able to push back and challenge what I'm trying to say, and maybe for that to spark a conversation that might even lead to some innovation. I think that's the purpose of why we're here today. Let me first say that the first presentation we had about macroeconomics, for me, two takeaways. First of them, pretty selfish takeaway. As the former finance minister of Denmark, it seems as if we are performing well, although surrounded by losers. If you look at the numbers, so that's nice. It's a satisfaction. I think the second takeaway for me is that it was a brilliant presentation that really delivered a push and a different numbers-based, fact-based perspective on the economy that is actually challenging a lot of the gossip out there about the economy. I mean, we've also been driving that in the media business. I have to admit that there's been a lot of talk about risk, downside risk, potential recessions. There's been a lot of people crying wolf for a prolonged period. And if you look, if you take a deep breath and look at the numbers, take an educated view of the numbers, that's not the facts on the table. And I think it's a very important message to get here up front. It's actually not looking that gloomy. And I guess if you go simplistic on the first presentation we got here, you can say, projections are looking actually pretty nice. We're tracking towards a recovery. It's going to be broad. It might be prolonged. Rates will probably come down. So will inflation. And if you put Gen AI on top of that, I guess that was a message, Andy. You can even look, you didn't say Goldilocks, but you can look at something nice with something nice upon it. So that's really nice. I don't disagree on that. I think you argued forcefully in favor of that scenario. So I'm not going to tear it into pieces, but I think I'm going to try and add a bit to that by actually hacking back to your introduction, the polycrisis introduction you had, because I would tend to agree that we've been, in a way, we've approached that conversation in a manner that is not really fruitful. I mean, I think we've seen the economic dents we've had and the risks we've had playing out for recent years. We've seen that as a symbol of as now polycrisis, now the big issues globally that we are afraid about or that we're really excited about because of how big they are. Now they're hitting the economy, and it's going to be really hard, and it's really going to fall to pieces. And that hasn't happened. I mean, I think you're right to say, Andy, that rather the polycrisis aspects of the economy has really been trigger points for something that is underlying the whole trend, and the underlying factors are really, they are economic factors. They're not polycrisis factors. They are classic economic issues about debt, about rates, about productivity, about demographics, about dynamics of the labor market, and all that. I think so I didn't get provoked at all. I think, but I did think when I listened in and then, well, compared what you said to the notes I'm bringing to the table today, that the risk there is that we don't sufficiently address what's really at stake when we're talking about polycrisis. And I think the polycrisis concept is misguiding because it's creating some kind of panic or idea that we're heading towards a permanent crisis scenario, and that's not corresponding to the numbers. So for an educated leader, you quickly dismiss that. But if that leads to a situation where you dismiss some of the forces, the trend forces, the deep trend forces that are behind what some intellectuals call a polycrisis moment, I think you end up with the wrong conclusion. So that's why I'm going to hatch back to some of the trends that are behind the concept of polycrisis and the very intense conversation out there about trend changes. And AI is one of them. AI is one of them. Gen AI is one of them. But there are obviously several. And I think I would guess, and I'll bet, that all of you as educated citizens, as modern professionals, as citizens, as corporate citizens, that you from time to time are deeply involved in the conversations about some of these big trend changes. I think all of us have, for many times, been involved in the conversation about Gen AI, technology disruption as such, where that could lead us, society, in society, economically, and for businesses. I think all of you have been involved in sustainability conversations, the conversations about primarily climate change and carbon consumptions. I think all of you have been involved in conversations about geopolitics and geopolitical change. And I would bet that also all of you have been involved in conversations about what I call value polarization. I mean, the push for businesses to embrace new values in a forward-leaning manner, diversity, stakeholder capitalism, ESG responsibilities on the one hand, and a polarized push in the opposite direction from large part of the political landscape on the other hand, playing out in organizations, among customers, and among regulators. I would bet that you've all been part of those conversations. And that's why I wanted to make this presentation. It says the impact of AI, but I think the main point I want to leave you with here is that I don't think there's a structured way to think about the impact of AI if we're talking at the level of future business landscape, without putting it into the context of the other macro trend forces that are changing. I think we need to kind of find a structured way of putting together a conversation about these forces. And you might say, I mean, this is a newspaper editor, former politician, speaking politics and newspaper gossip. That's not for me as a professional. I mean, I'm into the details, I'm into the tech, I'm into the numbers, like Andy. And I think what I wanted to argue here today is that, well, I think that's right. I mean, don't spend too much time thinking about and discussing some of the absolutely broad topics out there. But on the other hand, I think actually we live in a time of change where the fundamental business landscape and the forces around it are changing in a manner that is so deep and so interconnected that you do, not just as citizens, but also as professionals, have a kind of obligation to figure out a structured way of making out your own scenario about these forces for your country, for your industry, for your company, and even for you individually. And I guess, well, hatching back to the first Andy presentation, there's a bit of a point there about what you also deliver from Experian in terms of making that data-based and evidence-based. So what I wanted here to do today was to put forward 6 or 7 very simplistic observations, claims, maybe provocations about how these forces connect in a manner that will change the business landscape and in a manner that will make you think about Gen AI in a way that is different from the approach you'll have if you only look at it from a tech perspective or from an economic perspective. That's going to be my claim to fame today. And hopefully that will lead to a bit of discussion when I'm done. Observation number 1 is going to be the most downbeat thing you're going to hear today. It's going to be deeply skeptical, and I don't want to scare you or exaggerate things in manners that are not fair. But I think it's super important to simplistically put on the table that from a business landscape perspective, actually all the other forces we're talking about, except for technology and Gen AI within the technology bucket, actually seems to be pointing in the wrong direction. If you benchmark them against the basic conditions we come from, and if you benchmark them against, given the basic conditions we come from, if you benchmark them against the basic expectations, the basic scenario that all of us as professionals are operating with, given our experiences, looking back 20 or 30, for some 40 years in terms of professional experience. I think if you look at the geopolitical situation, I'm not saying it's that we're in for something deeply serious. I'm not saying that, well, with Trump elected or with the European elections playing out as expected. I mean, for the first time in human history, the European elections are exciting. I mean, we've never been there before, but it actually is exciting if you look at the poll numbers. I'm not saying that any of these incidents will end in a terrible manner necessarily, but I think if you look at the geopolitical picture, the trend away from an interconnected global economy dominated by the logic that trade, that connectivity will deliver prosperity and peace, and with a set of institutions designed to uphold that, even more intensively so, of course, in Europe, but also globally. And with the whole thing underpinned by an idea that the geopolitical order, that world order in terms of security and dominance, was set in stone, and therefore with peace as something we could depend on. It's not many years ago that was the assumption. I think that is changing structurally. That is changing structurally, and it's changing structurally for good. It might play out nicely and not in serious dramatic manners, but compared to where we come from, it's a structural setback. And I think we need to take that into account. Second, I feel convinced that we talk about sustainability and green transition. Andy brought the numbers up. We're coming out of a period where we talked a lot about the opportunity side of that equation, and it's certainly there. I mean, if you manage green transition, if you develop the relevant technologies, if you move early and position yourself as sustainable in terms of what you deliver, there's certainly an upside opportunity there for an individual, for a company, for an industry, for a nation, even for a region. But I think putting a lot of emphasis in that perspective has kind of, well, blinded us to the fact that structurally, from a business landscape perspective, it is a downside. I mean, there's cost to it, and it's going to be messy in terms of how it gets regulated, how it gets stimulated from a political point of view. So I think we're waking up to the fact that this is not going to be a smooth and linear transition where the benefit side will overshadow the challenge side. I think we're waking up to that now, politically, economically, and also from a business perspective. And finally, I think we're at the cusp of a period where the value polarization situation will play out pretty aggressively. You see that happening politically. Let's not talk politics too much today, but if pick any election in the free world, and you'll see these dynamics play out with business risk in terms of what might be the regulatory consequences, what might be the fiscal consequences. And you also see it playing out, I mean, among customers, and even among employees, among colleagues, from an HR perspective, managing diverse and polarized workforces with a lot of value tension at stake. I mean, I think we're waking up to the difficulty of actually handling that. I mean, think about the opinions around what goes on in the Middle East and how they play out in lots of companies. Think about the whole conversation about pride and sexual diversity and how that plays out in Denmark and in Danish company and for the Danish business community today. So the brute conclusion, I don't want to exaggerate it, but it's just observation number one, is that actually, when you look at the other macro trend forces that I think are deep and here to stay, well, for each one of those, I mean, there might be lots of upsides, and you can be a very fortunate or brilliant individual, a brilliant company, a brilliant industry, put yourself in a position where you'll only have the upside from these forces playing out to your advantage. But from a business landscape perspective, I think they're pointing down. That's observation number one, and I look forward to get challenged on that. Observation number two is that if you want to point to something that is equally deep, equally fundamental, but could point in the opposite direction, could point up, even in a manner that might enable us to cancel out the risk that comes from geopolitics, from sustainability pressure, and from value polarization. Tech is really, and tech in the broadest sense, technology, is really the one point you would hope for and you would bet on, from my perspective. In a way, and this is not a numbers-based analysis, there's no slides to support it, it's not economics, but I think if you take what's really playing out, the possibility to engineer a forward escape from a business landscape perspective, from a national perspective, even from a regional perspective, is really to drive, to accelerate technology empowered productivity growth. And I guess that was also hiding in the slide Andy had about demographics coming out in the end. So that's point number two. Tech tech is the bet, technology is the bet we need to make, and that we need to get right if we want to cancel out the downside risk coming from our other macro forces playing out. Observation number 3 is that I think, I mean, there's a lot of talk going on about, I mean, what will be the future development curve of the main technologies we're talking about, primarily Gen AI. I mean, are we going to see peak AI coming up soon? Is it going to flatten out? Will it get stifled or brought under some kind of control by regulators? Is it some kind of hype bubble? I mean, you've seen that with other technologies, and of course, to really figure that out, you don't need a former finance minister now editing a newspaper. You need tech experts on the stage, and you're going to have that. But I think from a trend perspective, I think there's reason to believe that this development is going to accelerate, and it's going to dominate, and it's going to be. I think we ain't seen nothing yet, and that's for one reason. That's not because of the intrinsics of the technology. That's because of the other macro forces playing out. I think there's a global security dynamics aspect playing out that will push technology development forward in a manner that is going to be, mind-blowing. I think the fact about Gen AI and other digital technologies, also quantum computing, is that these, there's talk about dual-use technology when we regulate trade, and we talk about the relationship between the US and China. And the fact is that if you look at this from a security perspective, from a weapons perspective, from a world order perspective, dominance within these fields of technology equals security dominance. It's the nuclear weapons of the 2020s. And I think there's no scenario where any of the major global players will lean back and let their primary rival take the lead on these technologies. I mean, you just can't afford that in terms of fundamental security. And that's why I think there's got to be, a heavy driver pushing the application and also the development of these technologies forward. And I think there's going to be an entanglement of that driver coming from, that's political, but it's not political as political parties and political speeches and elections. It's geopolitical. I think there's going to be an entanglement of geopolitics and the business landscape that's going to move much further than we've seen and experienced and also been taught to expect as professionals for the past 20 or 30 years. So that's observation number 3. I think therefore that we are facing a situation where technology, especially Gen AI, will be disruptive, and I think we need to rediscover the concept of disruption. And it's funny with big conversations about the future, because they tend to become very clumsy. I think a lot of people in the audience, at least the Danes, will remember that we had a big conversation about tech disruption going on 6, 7, or 8 years ago in this country. I think the same happened in Europe and globally. There was a lot of talk about exponential growth curves, about jumps, about technology disrupting the whole composition of industries, the workplace, economies as such. And then in a way came, the events that Andy talked about, and we moved away from that. The concept is not really broadly used today, if you look at the conversation politically, at least in Denmark. I think the fact The fact is that what happened 7 or 8 years ago, and before that, wasn't disruption. I mean, I think it was a steep but rather linear curve of digital technological development. But I think what will be happening now, and what seems to be happening now, is, I mean, truly disruptive. Truly disruptive. I think we need to rediscover the conversation about how disruption plays out and how you reap the advantages from it. So I think that's point number 4. Point number 5 is really about the magnitude and the numbers of this. And of course, there's lots of educated guesses about that. I think my guess is heavily dominated by my McKinsey background, because McKinsey, along with other large companies, large institutions, have been trying to map out the impact of Gen AI on the business landscape and the economy and the labor market in roughly similar studies. The McKinsey version came out, I think 3 or 4 months ago. It was building on a model that I worked intensively with back in the day, 7 years ago. So for me as an individual, that was an opportunity to compare the model results we got back then, 7 or 8 years ago, where we tried to model out what will automation mean for the economy, for the labor force, in terms of productivity, in terms of changes, in terms of automation, where technology, I mean, removes human work and frees up labor to do other stuff. I was able to compare the results 7 or 8 years ago with the results, the recent results. That is basically the same model, but with Gen AI on top. And I think I've also talked in depth with some of the former colleagues that are conducting the study. And I need to say, the numbers, and also the way the guys that did the numbers looked at them and felt about them, I think it was stunning. I mean, for Denmark, you can always challenge model results like that, but I think the model behind it is strong, it's deep, it's granular, and it's roughly similar to what you've seen from other contributors. The numbers, I mean, they're really the magnitude is really stunning. I mean, 7 or 8 years ago, we talked about a scenario where technology would be able to replace 40% of human labor in the Danish labor market within a pretty long time period. I mean, with a scenario with the full effect of that would play out in the 2040s, mid-2040s. Now, McKinsey is talking 60% in the mid-2030s. And they're talking about more than 50% of current actual job positions in the labor market, where more than 2/3 of the labor, the actual tasks you're carrying out today, can be replaced by technology. And that's double the amount of job positions with a 2/3 potential than what we saw 7, 8 years ago. It's massive. It's massive. So I think that's observation number 5. Observation number 6 is a sour one. I'm sorry about it, but I think if you agree with the kind of pattern I've tried to establish here, I guess the conclusion is pretty easy. I mean, from a national perspective, from a business landscape perspective, I mean, this is good news. There's certainly, I mean, there's societal risk to it. It's going to be if McKinsey is right, if I'm right about the disruptive potential we're looking at, the change will certainly be, I mean, it'll certainly cause noise. I mean, the magnitude of change will put companies, industries, individuals, professions at risk. And there's a huge need for support and for a managed transition into what we're looking at. But if you look at the broader picture, it's really the opportunity we need. It's really coming at the right moment, because if you look at the other macro forces that are also playing out, I think only a productivity leap, only becoming more productive at getting sustainable, only becoming more productive at handling geopolitical risk, only becoming more productive at actually delivering the kind of results, services, impact that will calm down value polarization. It's the one hope we got. So really the fact that the magnitude of the potential is so big, should be a reason for optimism. And I think that's the case in a lot of companies. And I think that's the case probably in this audience. I just have to say that, well, in politics, I think there's a very mixed situation at the moment. If you look at Denmark, if you look at Europe, obviously the conversation is hot around Gen AI, around technology. It's a lot about regulation, and for good reasons. We need to regulate the risks of this technology. But I think that there's a lack of grip in terms of creating a consensus about reaching out for the productivity gains we're talking about here. There's a lack of grip. There's a lack of consensus about not just what you need to do to get there, but also whether you should actually aim for that. And I think that's disturbing from a business point of view. And that leads me to my last point, number 7, and a conversation opener. I think that actually, leaves business a bit home alone. I think we need to kick off a conversation among business leaders that, well, really navigating the kind of macro changes we're talking about, and really, engineering the productivity leap that would enable the rest of society to kind of handle the big changes that are playing out. That needs, it's not going to come from politicians. Of course, we can hope that it's going to come from politicians, and we can hope that they're not going to do harm, and we can also hope that over time consensus will be building for them to support the right business development. I'm an optimist, so I think that certainly might play out in the medium term. But leaning on it would be a wrong decision from a business perspective. So really, I think it's very much up to the business landscape to deliver the kind of technology-driven productivity leap that will help out the societal context to stabilize. So I think it's the other way around from what you've seen in a lot of other historical periods. And I think, that means that you need to acutely try and understand what's really happening in the business landscape currently. And I see, and that's going to be my last piece before we move into discussion, hopefully. I see, really big differences playing out. If you take Denmark, some of the recent reports that's coming out on the Danish economy, where economic experts, the economic wise men, as we call them in Denmark, that's the Council of Economic Advisors to the government, when they decompose the numbers you showed, Andy, the headline numbers tell us that we are performing marvelously and we're surrounded by losers. It's wonderful, and that's also the atmosphere here in Denmark. That's how we like to think about ourselves. If you decompose the numbers, what you see is a huge divide. Among what the economic experts call superstar companies, the 5 or so companies in Denmark that are really operating globally in very attractive industries, and the rest of the economy. And what you see, new numbers came out just yesterday, I think the day before yesterday. I think, 1.5% of the 2-point-something% growth Denmark had in 1 year back came from these companies producing, selling, and also delivering services or products that are consumed outside of Denmark, never touching Danish territory. Never touching Danish territory. Of course, Novo makes up a lot of that. I mean, the Novo numbers are creating a lot of noise, but it's not just a Novo thing, it's a structural thing. And I think we should be proud of these companies, and I think I'm trustful that they are leaning heavily into the kind of productivity leap scenario I've tried to discuss today as well, the necessity and or the hope we have. But I think all the rest of us need to think about, I mean, how do we latch onto that development relevantly without, I mean, getting comfortable about the nice headline numbers we're looking at, because we need to understand that they are polluted by the fact that someone else is living on a different planet. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Bjarne. 7 interesting observations, and open for questions or comments to what Bjarne just said. I think we have down here.
Thank you. Jesper from Atradius. Bjarne, you're talking about the sort of the technology war between some of the big forces on our globe, the big countries, and saying that no one big economy is going to afford to lose that war. So everybody's going to be feeding into it. That is going to drive the technological development. But how do you see the EU in that landscape? Is it a player among these? And if or if not, what are the consequences of the EU's role in that development?
It's a brilliant question, and I'm going to give a super gloomy answer. I think the numbers are stunningly depressing. I think if you look at numbers in terms of technology investment, innovation leaders, and also regulatory framework, I have to say. I mean, I think there are very good reasons for the EU to try out a strategy of pioneering regulation against AI risk, trying to engineer a Brussels effect on the rest of the globe. My old friend and colleague, Margrethe Vestager, heading up that whole thing. But I think the blunt truth of it is that if you combine, I mean, the fact that regulation is more bumpy, the fact that investment is low, the fact that well, we're not really allowing for large companies to innovate and lead the way here, and also not really for a startup scene to grow in the manner you see in the US, and by the way, also in China. I think it's looking really bleak. I think the EU will wake up to that. That was my point number 2. I think security concerns, not just economic concerns, not just business concerns, will lead to a wake-up call for that. If you listen to the speech Macron gave just recently, I mean, the Europe can die speech. That's really, I mean, he's talking about 3 death threats. He's talking about, well, populism in politics, let's put that aside. But then he's talking about, well, security and economic decline, and the two are combined. They're combined, and it's really about, essentially, it's about lagging behind in terms of technology development. I think Europe will react to that. But the trouble is that the reaction, I mean, trust me, I've spent 20 years of my life in politics. I mean, there's no guarantee that policymakers will get it right the first time around. There's no guarantee. and not necessarily also the second and the third. And I think there's a risk that this is going to lead to a heavy move towards debt-financed industrial policy in Europe. That's going to create opportunity for a lot of companies and industries, but it's also going to create a business landscape that will be a lot more dominated by politics, by lobbying, by regulation, by decision-making cycles at the European level. So all of a sudden, as a business leader, you need to follow the European elections. I mean, that was not a distraction you needed to have on your radar just a while ago. So I think it looks bleak for Europe. I think Europe will react to that, but I think the reaction carries risk in itself.
We have time for one more question, even though we're a little bit over time. So we have a question down here, the last question.
Bjarne, I'm curious to your thoughts on circular economics and how, as opposed to production spikes, how we start talking about circular concepts and actually including people, product, planet, and combining all of that into a more holistic whole.
Yep, that's also an absolutely brilliant question, and I'll give you an even more gloomy answer. And I'm not a gloomy person as such. I mean, I'm actually pretty hopeful. I think this whole pattern can play out, and we can make it play out in a manner that will leave us a lot better off. Back to Andy's presentation. But I think the tough conclusion is that circularity, sustainability, the whole ESG agenda, and also at the core of that, the carbon challenge. I mean, I think we need to focus. I mean, that's really the big. That sits on top of a lot of challenges and threats in terms of sustainability. Also, hacking back to the 800,000-year graph you showed. I think we need to admit, hopefully in a closed forum, not for quotation, that that is at the moment that is being pushed out of the agenda in a manner that is stunning. It's being pushed out by value polarization. I mean, if you look at the likely election results in almost any free nation on the world, from the US to the European countries, just recently the Netherlands, I think that there's really, there's mobilization against that whole agenda, heavily so. Maybe because the ones of us that supported it didn't really tell the truth about it at the outset. I mean, we pictured the whole thing as opportunity. It certainly is, but there's also cost, and it's difficult, and there's distribution issues playing out. So I think it's being pushed back from politics, and on top of that, it's being pushed down the prioritization ladder by security. So even if you talk about, if you listen to non-polarized business leaders and political leaders sitting at the very top of decision making globally, they talk a lot more today about security, about weapons, about supply chains, about resilience, and a lot less about circularity and sustainability than even a year ago. So that makes me think that, I don't think you and I can win an outright vote about that right now. Not politically. I think actually not also among investors, shareholders. At least I think there's a pushback on that, and I think it's sustained. So the only hope we got is productivity. I think circularity, sustainability, the ESG agenda needs to be about productivity. It needs to be about a hack or a fix driven by more productive ways of creating the kind of products and services we want to consume. And that's basically what I've been trying to say here today.
Thank you so much. A big round of applause for Bjarne Corydon. Thank you.